this is pretty new research coming out for the citrus industry. Tell me, what were some of the objectives initially going into it?
Yeah, so historically, roof rat control in orchard systems is usually done, like I said, historically been done through the use of rodenticide applications. And they can be effective, but more effective management usually relies on the use of multiple strategies. And so we were trying to come up with an effective way to develop an integrated approach for trying to monitor and manage roof rats in citrus orchards.
Yeah, definitely. And so after the development, you spent a large portion of the research developing IPM approaches for roof rats and research. After the development of actually two different IPM programs for roof rats, what did those look like?
Yeah, so initially what we wanted to supplement our bait application program with was a new trap called the Good Nature A24 trap, which is a multi-repeating trap which allows you to more or less put the trap out there and forget about it for 4 to 6 months. So the idea was to reduce the labor associated with that kind of program. And so the idea was to do an initial bait application to knock down populations and then follow that up with a trapping program to keep those animals from reinvading. Again, focusing primarily on the use of the Good Nature A24 trap. And then, of course, continuing to do some monitoring throughout with tracking tunnels to let us know when populations were rebounding. And that approach, unfortunately, did not work very well for us. The bait application was successful at knocking down those populations, but they did quickly rebound. The good nature traps just weren't intercepting those rats like we had hoped. So we then went back to the drawing board and developed a second IPM approach where we again initially knocked down populations with bait applications, but instead of utilizing the good nature traps to keep those populations from rebounding, we instead used trapping tunnels, which are tunnels that have a couple of snap traps, one on each end. And we operated those over the course of a 5-month period after that baiting program, checking those snap traps every 3 weeks. And this approach we did find actually worked quite well. In fact, we had further reduction over time in rat numbers through that snap trapping effort than what we initially saw with the bait application approach. So it worked quite well for us, and long term, it seems like cost-wise, it's going to be a very cost-effective approach too.
Yeah, in terms of the differences between IPM solution 1 that was not effective, IPM solution 2 that was, what was the actual difference in terms of efficiency and, like you said, that cost-effective nature?
Yeah, so I'll start with cost. The cost of IPM2 was, I forget the exact numbers, but it was 5 times as expensive as like a bait station only approach. The IPM2 approach that utilized the snap trapping primarily was a little bit more expensive than a bait station only approach for that first year, but the cost was really driven by supply costs and not labor issues. And so when we start to look at years 2 or 3 or 4, once you've bought the snap traps, the cost between a bait station only and that IPM approach is equivalent. There's really no difference there. So that's real positive. And as far as, overall efficacy, with the IPM2 approach, we were looking at 92% efficacy after 6 months. So it was working quite well and lends us to believe, we only tested for up to 6 months, but it lends me to believe that, we would see long-term efficacy for probably a year or 2, perhaps even more.
Certainly. And one last thing, Roger, with the loss of many of the popular products that used to exist to control vertebrate pests like this, I'm talking chemicals here, and of course the rollout of the Rodenticide Act, do you think that this is really the most sustainable solution that growers have up to this point?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that, the world that we live in is changing, particularly with respect to vertebrate pest management. There are already changes, it's like you said, as far as what can be used currently for agricultural production systems. We can still use these first-generation anticoagulants, like I've talked about, but our continual use will rely on our ability to minimize their use and look at some other alternatives as well. And so, this particular approach is designed to only utilize the rodenticide when we really need it, and then focus on some of these other tools like snap trapping for the rest of the time, so that our reliance isn't near as high. Therefore, we're not having those kinds of potential negative consequences to non-targets, which is really the focus on some of the elimination and reduction in the use of some of these rodenticides and other pesticides.